I'm Dr. Diane Kalendra. I'm here this morning with Dr. Alex Ryan, the Love Doctor, and we're going to be talking about trends in relationships this morning. So, hey, Alex, tell me, why do women have so many problems with men in relationships?
Well, that's a very good question, Diane. You see, there's been a trend in society away from the male as a breadwinner in the family in recent decades. Women are going out to work and having children. So they're not like their mothers who just stayed at home and just had children. Men are trying to apply the rules they were taught by their fathers to a very different lifestyle. We men were taught by our dads that a man goes to work and then he supports his family, and the woman stays at home, has children, and looks after them. So a man thinks he has a final say, or the final say in the relationship, like his dad, but his partner says, hey, I'm making a living as well, I'm looking after the children as well, don't I have an equal say? You see, this is where the friction in a relationship happens. Both partners need to understand the dynamics of their experience. Otherwise, this friction is subconscious and clashes occur between the partners without them fully knowing why.
So what you're saying is that a man is doing what his father did, but the mother's role's changed.
Absolutely, that's exactly what I'm saying. You see, our wives are not like our mothers. They're far more educated, they're smarter, actually they're just more ambitious. So we have strong-minded women in relationships now who don't really need a man anymore. Not the sort of man that our father was, that is a domineering individual. You see, I remember when I was young, very, very young, my mother worked a few years as a cleaner. My father, on the other hand, was also a migrant who worked as a construction worker. He worked as a construction worker until, of course, he broke his back, which is very unfortunate for him. That was when he was around 50 years of age. And, of course, he was laid up for about 2 years until he was able to rehabilitate his back so he could go back to work. So, you see, we were living on the edge of poverty during that time because my mother worked as a part-time cleaner. She would come home and look after us 4 kids, plus my father. See, my father, he didn't really have a lot of skills around the home, so he didn't really help my mother, and he also had his back problems, and that certainly stopped him from doing things around the house. So, you see, back then there was absolutely no flexibility in roles. There was a breadwinner, and there was also a house tender. Nobody could really do both roles. So, now, when I started relationships, I had an absolutely terrible time with this. I actually learned from my dad that the man is the boss manager at home. He comes home and he tells his wife what to do because, of course, he's the breadwinner. Of course, no relationship lasted more than a few months for me until I worked out that I should cooperate with a lady and get on the same page with what the relationship was about. I actually started to listen to women more and then make decisions together rather than barge in and try and do it my way and make those decisions. Actually, it was a tremendously less stressful time when I actually got that insight into relationships. See, what it meant is I went from relationship failure, relationships only lasting a few months, and then finding a woman of my dreams, marrying and living happily ever after, so to speak. Well, I'm still living happily, actually, Diane, but I don't know about the forever after. So families were also a lot bigger back then because women could look after more kids. She wasn't working, which allowed her, freed her up, basically. She wasn't time poor as women are today.
Yeah, so is that why men and women are getting divorced more so than they were, say, 50 years ago?
Yeah, I think so. I think, men and women back then had to live together to form a very strong family unit. Dad went to work, Mum stayed at home and looked after the children. These days, there is a role reversal, a complete role reversal. Mum is going to work, Dad's looking after the children. So a woman doesn't really need a man to make an income anymore and to support her children. She actually can do that all herself, quite stressfully actually, but she can do it all herself. So likewise, a man can cook, he can clean now, he can look after children. He's become quite maternal and also domesticated. So he doesn't really need to have a woman either. He doesn't need to have a wife if he didn't really have to. He can actually support himself. So it's an interesting time in our history in the Western world. In that sense, it's understandable why people don't stay in relationships when unhappy. They just get out. Back in the bad old days, and I call them the bad old days for a reason, Mona had to stay with Dad because he had the career and income. She had the home and children. See, there was a codependency that doesn't exist today.
So, why is it such an interesting time in history?
Well, it's an interesting time because men have to change the way they think and act in a relationship. A woman is unlikely to put up with a domineering husband, or she'll get very unhappy in a relationship. So then she'll leave, or she's just going to be miserable and complain about it. A man has to acknowledge that his partner doesn't really need him anymore like they did back then. That codependency, it just doesn't exist anymore. So we have a problem. Can men learn to give up the reins in the relationship a bit? Can a man learn to be submissive with his wife and give in when decisions are made sometimes? It's an important question for a man to ask himself. He should ask himself how he acts and thinks in the relationship. He has to be more proactive in thinking about his relationship. Is that creating conflict or friction in the relationship? Is he going with what his partner is saying, or is he just butting heads to prove a point? That's actually detrimental to the relationship. Actually, I remember when I got married, and my best man Andrew said to me, he was giving a speech, of course, and he's been married a long time, about 15 years at that time. And there were two valuable words he said. He said, mate, I've learnt two valuable words and it's worked a charm in my relationship with my wife. These two magic words, he says, you've got to say sincerely, and they are, yes, dear. That's pretty funny, isn't it? A few years ago, I was watching a documentary, and there was a new education course for Japanese men, and these Japanese men were sitting around and they were meeting and they were talking amongst each other. They're forming these clubs where they were trying to be better in relationships, and they were really trying to think about ways they can make their wives happy. They're quite modernized in that sense. And they were saying that what they really needed to do, and they were quite serious about this, that what they really need to do to agree with their wife is that they need to practice the words yes dear. So they were sitting around and they were practicing yes dear with each other.
I like the yes dear.
I'm sure most women do, actually. They're very wise people, the Japanese.
Absolutely. So how does friction or arguments occur in a relationship?
Well, that's a very, very, very good question. It's a question of who is the boss in the relationship. That is, who has the final say and who doesn't give in and wants their way. See, when you make decisions about where you live and how the house looks and who looks after the kids and who cooks and who cleans, who makes that decision in the household? That's a very important question. Often the woman secretly wants her husband to do things but doesn't say anything. If the man does things around the home, she loves him. But if the man stands up like a man and refuses to give in, and then there's friction starting, particularly if she starts to speak up, you see, she complains to him, criticizes him, and he fights not to be told. Basically, he's saying, don't tell me what to do. After all, that's what his father used to say, right?
Yeah, so it's like a power struggle going on.
Yeah, there is a strong power struggle going on. Yeah, that's very, very, very true. So it's a subconscious power struggle, though. It's not really evident to both parties until the man learns to give in a bit and take some orders. If he doesn't continue to give up some of that power struggle, unfortunately, friction continues. You see, a woman likes to work together with others. That's a biological drive for a female. She likes to cooperate with others. She likes to nest, care and foster. That's actually biological. That's been proven that happens in her brain. A man, on the other hand, is biologically and socially driven to be independent, to fight, to compete, and sometimes to dominate. See, these two drives clash. That is, the drive that a female has and the drive that a man has. They don't go together. They're like two rams butting horns together to gain ground. There are two ways of being in a relationship, in other words.
So what's your advice for couples in a relationship?
Oh, what's my advice to couples? Yeah, that's a good question. Well, the thing is, to control the fight and tame the conflict, couples need to talk more about their relationship. They need to talk about what they see or feel is a healthy relationship. Then they need to establish some rules. I call these the rules of engagement. Pretty funny way of describing it, but it's actually a good way of describing it, because if you go through the exercise, you understand what I mean. See, every relationship should have these types of rules, the rules of engaging in communication. From there, they can have goals and agreements, about who does what and when, e.g. who picks the children up after school, who cooks, who cleans, etc., etc. And enjoy losing control sometimes to the other person. Look, it's okay to fight. There's nothing wrong with that. Just fight when it's worth fighting for. If your partner is unhappy that she has to tell you all the time to pick up after yourself, then you need to start showing some initiative. Do some housework. Actually, women actually find it very sexy if a man does housework.
Really? Well, not something that I would have expected, but there you go. Anyway, thank you for your time, Dr. Alex. It's been interesting and I've learned a lot about relationships this morning.
Yeah, thanks, Diane.
Cheers.